made for that?
It might make us just go faster. So who gives a shit?
Do 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 do. Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, the Tubs at the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Dallas Hammer, joined by brave, bold Brian Marceau.
Good to be back, dude. Sometimes breaks are nice, especially when the breaks take place because something good finally happened in basketball, at least on the men's side. But yeah, dude, good to be back. Always feel energized with some time off. We're closing in on the deep, dark desert that is the end of spring football to the start of fall camp. So, yeah, here to enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, Brian, bringing it up for everybody that wasn't aware, we did not record last week because there was an Idaho basketball game going on at our normal showtime. Or, well, it was actually technically after what would have been our showtime because it's Big Sky After Dark. But anyways, we will get to that a little bit later in the show. Joined as always, well, mostly always, well, sometimes always. You know what? We love him when he's here. He's producer redacted, the man in Moscow, Marten Heemstra. Marten, how you doing, man?
Doing good. It's been an eventful couple of weeks for athletics, but hey, it's good to be back on. Good to talk some wrapping up of basketball stuff now.
It's been an eventful couple of weeks for your tech support. What's our status there?
Stuff is doing what I can with the money I got.
Okay,
that's fair. That's as Dane Moon says, that's the end of Veggie Tales. Guys, we're going to get into it right now. Let's close the book on 2024, 2025 Idaho basketball. We're going to close the book of Starch Sadness / Madness. We're going to jump into the women's team, Marten. The women entered the Big Sky Conference tournament the other week with the number 3 seed and had a first game against the number 6 Montana Lady Grizz, who they beat twice previously in the regular season, 63-50 in the first game and 70-57 in the second. But then, unfortunately, the Vandals' dreams of moving on towards the finals came to an end against the Lady Grizz. Martin.
Yeah, it just kind of speaking the game. I sadly had work, so I wasn't able to watch it, but just from following it, it never really felt close. It was close for the first half, obviously, and then kind of Montana pulled away. If you didn't watch the tournament, Montana made it all the way to the finals and lost on a last second shot to obviously winners Montana State Bobcats, which they're by far the best team this conference this year. There was Montana State clear number 1, NAU clear number 2, and then Idaho. Maybe get to that later, but just kind of overall, generally speaking, it was for the women's. It was a kind of speaking for just that. It was a disappointing end of the season with how the first half started for them. They started off on like a 7. I can't remember. They started. They had like a 6, 7. I can't remember, like an 8-game win streak right now, but they started off pretty well. And then things kind of faltered once they hit that NAU game in Flagstaff, and it kind of went off the rails from there. But still, all things considered, I think with where we were, honestly, of almost 12 months ago now, I'm not going to say it was a bad, terrible season given where we were.
Yeah,
I mean, hey, they had 18 wins on the year. And Martin, part of what you talked about, like when we covered the women's team throughout the season, the first 2/3 of the season saw a 7-game winning streak in the first third, and then a 6-game winning streak in the second third. So let's say 13 out of their 18 wins came in 2 consecutive streaks. That's part of why there was the level of enthusiasm. Now, like, hey, Martin, like anyone can listen, tell tonally, like this is not Martin like screaming sunshine and rainbows right now, because like, hey, the first 2/3 season were great, and then the second third, I mean the last third, how it finished was, I mean they were just a little shaky comparatively.
Yeah, it wasn't good. I mean, there's no beating around the bush here. It was not a good third, and I'm sure people would probably say that.
Oh yeah, but like, hey, we're here to close the book. That means we're talking the totality of the season, like you said. What Dallas was Idaho women? What were they picked at the start of the year?
I believe they were picked 8th to start the year.
8 out of 10. Idaho certainly turned those expectations upside down. Yeah. So, like the very last game is the easiest one to attach your emotions to. But we're talking the full season, Martin. 18 wins. Well, the men haven't had 18 wins in a long time, man. So no, dude, this was.
I think the other big thing to remember was, I want to say I'm getting this number right. They either had 2 returning players from the team 2 or 3 returners from last year's roster come back. So generally, still what they had was.
Martin, I'm going to jump in very quickly on you just to give the full stat here. 23% of minutes played and 20% of scoring returned from 2023, 2024.
Yeah. So looking at the big picture, kind of, it still was I'm still going to give it I'm still going to give it a success. Would I've liked seen a win or 2 in Boise? I mean, obviously, everybody would want to see a win or 2 in Boise. But still, I think it was still, I'd say, a successful first season for Coach Barrera and his staff.
Yeah, I think far and away home run. You got to give this season an A for what the Vandal women's program was going into this season. Yeah, it really stinks to come out in that third quarter completely flat against Montana. You're down 33-31 at halftime, and then Montana scored 11 more than Idaho, I think. So at the end of the third, it was Idaho needed a miracle in that fourth quarter to turn it around. So it's a really unfortunate way to lose your first game of the season to the Lady Grizz. But yeah, when you look at it, guys, and I mean, we were talking in the spring about, hey, the Amy's just left. What the hell are we going to do? And Coach Barrera, gets promoted up from top assistant. And I don't think any of us were expecting a winning season in the conference finishing third in the conference in the regular season is extremely impressive. Again, off of cobbling together the roster and the coach putting everything together at a much shorter road than what a full offseason would have been. So really honestly impressive there. I thought the Vandals defense looked really good. Hopefully the offense can spike up a little bit more as the years go. But honestly, first year of Arthur Morera, man, give me more.
Yeah.
That incredible season.
It compared to where and I'm not gonna bash. I mean, maybe you'll see me take some slight jabs in Patreon.com and our Early Tubs Discord, but still, it compared to last year, the offense was faster. Yeah, they maybe didn't score more than they probably would have scored some more. I would have liked, but still, compared to last year, where they were taking up 25, almost the entire shot clock. They were taking. Oh, they were making the fat. They were making if they had an open person under the basket, they were throwing it down court and getting them the easy buckets. The tempo they were if there was an open shot they were taking it. It felt a little Newly-ish, but not truly the John Newly live and die by 3 though. It was it was different, but a much better different.
Yeah. Brian, I know you've been on the shelf, so I do want to kick it back over to you for just a second, but I just want to give a shout out to Olivia Nelson. Man, what a bummer to have somebody here only for one season, but man, what a season it was. One of the better seasons I can remember a woman having on the Lady Vandals basketball team. So big shout out to her. Unfortunate that it's the end of her career, and we'll see the roster change a little bit as Jennifer Adlin and Rosie Schweitzer, I think, are gone as well, Martin. But Brian, Martin, any big final thoughts on anything we haven't covered about the women's team and overall giving the season a pretty resounding success?
Yeah, so I mean, to do the bullet point version like we did for instant reaction football games, where we'd say hey, what went well, what did not. So a couple points to say what went well is hey, you just hit on Olivia Nelson. I mean, she's here for 1 year, but comes in first team All Big Sky. That's a big deal. Hope Hassman, sophomore, number 2 scorer. She took a developmental step up, averaged around 9-ish under Carrie Amy, averaged just under 13 on the year as the number 2 scoring option this season. So hey, that's a big deal. Hope Hassman's the top returning scorer for next year. So that's another plus. You already hit it, but radically exceeded expectations. You'd say Coach Moira, he filled in he had short notice. He filled in some gaps in the roster because when a coach leaves, you lose some recruits too. And that happened for Idaho. So for the short notice job, Coach Moira did fantastic. So obviously you'd say that went well. And especially the first 2/3 of the season, Idaho finished, I think, as the clear number 3 or number 4 team in the Big Sky. When we're talking the totality of the body of work, Montana clearly with their new head coach now, I got to look up the dude's name because he's not Idaho, but their interim coach was just promoted to head coach. They clearly turned a page the last third of the season and were probably the 3rd best team by season's end. But talking whole season, Idaho clear number 3 team. So all those things went well. Really the things you'd say didn't go well are the early tournament loss to a good, surprisingly good Montana team that last third of the season. And obviously developmental steps to take defensively. And the last one, this isn't it didn't go well. It's more of a question for into next season. Idaho's losing 3 of their top 4 scorers, which just means for the Vandal women to stay where they're at or to take another step. That's going to happen because some players we do not know at this point come onto the roster, or other athletes, people like Hope Hassman, take additional developmental steps.
Quickly hitting the comment section here, Brian. Jason Mayer, anyone in the portal on the women's side? Not that we are aware of, Jason, but we will obviously report and let anybody know as soon as we find out some of that stuff. Tom Kendall, so fun to watch Olivia. Going to miss her style of play. Very happy with Arthur and staff's first year. Fully agree on all of those points. Captain 58, Art's first year was A+ effort from the whole squad. Again, couldn't agree more for the reasons we've been pointing out. You're behind the ball already, getting hired late in the process because of the way everything shook out, and then to turn things around and have a winning record, both in conference and out of conference, just outstanding work from the Vandals. And McLean Westbrook, with improvements in both men's and women's basketball for the Vandals, how long until they finally win King Spud? Well, that's a
Dallas,
fair
can you
question.
filibuster? I'm doing some crack research. Can you filibuster for like 10 more seconds?
Yeah, I think it's probably more likely that Idaho's basketball team wins over Idaho State's football team anytime soon.
Well, different question. So, hey, McLean, Idaho State was fun this year, assuming you guys keep the roster together for next year. 15-15, big deal. McLean, the last time Idaho State had consecutive seasons above 500, was it before or after Marten was born? Marten, tell us again, what year were you born?
1994.
The last 2 consecutive years of Idaho State basketball being above 500 were 93-94 and 94-95. So back around Martin's birth date. So the basic answer to when Idaho's finally going to have King Spud, well, in theory, next year should be on the table, because I have to say, I think I expect Moira to he's got to figure out Seton Sobleski. Okay, Idaho State women's basketball, even in a down year, they're still tough. Idaho's got to figure that one out. I will say, Idaho, in spite of men and stepping on the next section, in spite of having like one of the worst defenses we've ever seen, we're still pretty competitive with Idaho State and Moscow. So I don't think the gap in men is that far. I actually think the gap on the women's side is in favor of Idaho, but there obviously matchups matter when we're talking individual teams. So McLean, am I going to go on record saying next year is the year? No. But if I had to gamble, I'd gamble next year.
And that's it from the previewing Jungle Land podcast. Thank you, McLean, for jumping on for that nice little shot there. Feels like we're changing the subject, frowny face. McLean, do keep your chin up a little bit, because for all of that dunking Brian did, I mean, the game still matters, and
Idaho State had
won that game in a while.
Idaho State had the men's MVP on their roster and still could not pick up a conference tournament win. What else has to go right?
Getting the hell out of Pocatello.
Just asking.
Probably what's got to go right. Anyways, gentlemen, Marten has kind of disappeared into the black box of sadness because his microphone is kind of working and his webcam doesn't seem to be working.
Let's fucking go.
There we go. He's still here. But Marten, Brian, any final thoughts on the women's basketball team before we move on to Starch Sadness?
Gosh, I'm going to allow myself to get positive sunshine rainbows for 1 second. I do think there's a lot to be grateful for this year with how the season went. I do think I think the team, there's a lot to, you guys should start. If you're not already, I'm a little disappointed because that's who I am. But like, just get to support this team. Supporting them kind of can go a long way to even getting just more recruits to come to this program. So please, like, if anything, like, just start supporting, like, show your support for this team.
Well, okay, other takeaway we didn't talk about. We covered Moira's contract last. It was a 1-year contract. Obviously, everyone wants him to be extended right away. We've heard no news in any direction, which isn't my understanding, is because, hey, recruitment's going on the way it has, that he's we're probably going to hear about an extension relatively soon.
Which, again, very much well-deserved. Let's hope that there's no tomfoolery or shenanigans with the contract, as Idaho has certainly found themselves in that position before. Again, that may have even been planned. Well, maybe, I mean, it's certainly not planned to have your first hire not sign the contract, but maybe towards the end it became hey, you know what? We like Art. Let's give him a shot. And I mean, it's certainly worked out so far. So hopefully we'll see him. I have full faith that he's going to get signed. But as Patty Frakes jumps into the comment section, women's basketball games are fun. Also, you would hope ... TG things. So Terry Golick's a wild card. Who knows what's going to happen? But gentlemen, before we get into the men's side of the discussion, if you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. And you could check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on Brian's pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and the same thing I say almost every week. Fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire United States. Just bring your clothes, and HRE is going to handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 406-540-4450 or check them out at hughesriver.com. On to the men's discussion of starch sadness, Brian. We had some serious ground broken in Boise. Do you want to tell us what happened?
Yeah, well, for the first time since 25th, wait, hold on. Give me 1 second. Yeah, for the first time since
tournament win?
Yeah, since the 2017.
Let's say 17. Yeah, 17 is correct.
Yeah, since the 2017 season, Idaho picked up a win in the Big Sky Conference tournament, which, hey, for Idaho, we can call that a big deal, right? It's 2016, 2017 was the last time Idaho picked up one. So, yeah, that was a big deal. So Idaho closed the season in the Big Sky Conference tournament. Really, the 2-game performance was perfectly emblematic of who Idaho basketball was this year. Game 1 in beating top 5 Portland State. And by the way, we talked on the show, Portland State did kick Idaho's ass, both matchups. So what Idaho do? Idaho did what I really wish they would have done previously against Portland State and said, look, if Portland State is going to abuse us inside, here's what we do. Let's play a 2-3 zone, make the guys who can't shoot. Now, fair to ask why in God's name that did not happen earlier against Portland State, but it happened when it happened. Idaho gave what I would call their best defensive effort of the entire year in that second round matchup in Boise. Remember, Idaho got a bye due to beating UNC and held on. Idaho led by as many as 20 in the second half. They needed that cushion, held on for a 10-point win. Idaho led in that game by Christian Gonzalez putting up 24 points on 12 shots. Jack Payne chipped in 20 on 11 shots, and Tyler Linhart off the bench chipped in 9. Now, the second game, Idaho just got their ass kicked by Montana from start to finish. Wasn't
Brian,
really close.
I want to jump in very quickly before that because I want to make sure that we point this out. That Idaho defensive performance in the first half of that Portland State game was legitimately the best defense I've seen that team play honestly in years and years and years. Held Portland State to 20 points. Portland State ended up losing that game 80-70. So do the math there. 70 minus 20 is 50 in the second half. So Idaho 20 points in that first half was honestly phenomenal. Brian, Portland State shot 24% from the field. As Tubbs at the club, make sure to let everybody know Dallas likes good D. I like it big and strong. That's what it is. Big, strong, tough D. That's what it's all about. Brian,
yeah,
continue. Sorry.
Well, no, that was just to bring it up for a statistical reference, that was Idaho's first time with a defensive rating below 100 since January 2nd at home against Montana State. So, yeah, it'd been a while since Idaho looked at all okay defensively. And against Portland State, to me, that was the best energy on the defensive side of the ball I saw the entire year. So, great news. Then Idaho clearly looked like it was really in virtually the entire team's head, other than Jack Payne and Titus Yearout. Maybe a surprise for some people that's second name. But realistically against Montana, Jack Payne and Titus Yearout look like the only guys ready for the moment. And Idaho absolutely got their ass kicked from start to finish against Montana in that semifinal. Now, hey, to be fair, Montana's 24-9 on the year, 15-3 during the Big Sky season. They won the Big Sky Conference tournament. Montana had an objectively pretty good Big Sky team, certainly better than Idaho, so whatever. It was just more, it was a little disappointing to see some of the individual efforts. Jack Payne led Idaho with 18 points on 12 shots. Christian Gonzalez looked solid for a stretch in the first half, then kind of faded. He had 8 points on the night. Colton Mitchell did score 12, but it took 13 shots to get there, and he had some pretty rough misses. Colton Mitchell had a good season, but just had a rough Big Sky Conference tournament. And then on the bench, I mean, honestly, like Titus Yearout was the only guy on the bench who looked like he was ready for the moment at all. Scored 7 points. Again, it was a 78-55 loss. So, hey, that ends the season for Idaho. Vandals finished 14-19 on the year, 8-10 in Big Sky play. If you want to count the tournament, that's 9-11 in Big Sky play. What went well? Dallas, I'm going to throw it to you first. A couple of some what went well points, because I know basketball is a little bit less your thing, but you still paid enough attention. So what went well this year? Other than your mute button has been going very well.
Damn it. Thank you. One thing I do want to point out, and of course the Tubbs stats department is working with, again, we're all on pretty old, outdated machinery here. So the Montana website is butt cheeks and can't load anything. But James Jacobs jumps in. I think Montana is on a 12-game winning streak right now. I would love to fact check that, but obviously can't. So anyways, man, Colton Mitchell, I thought was awesome, Brian. It was really nice to pull a kid that probably should have been here in the first place if Golick didn't screw up the Kloss thing. Bring him back up to he should have been up here on the north side from the start. Really nice to have him show up and kind of solidify that point guard position. Brian, go ahead.
Not 12 in a row, James. They've won 4 in a row, but they've won 14 of their last 15 to close the season.
There we go. Thank you for the correction there, as Brian's computer decided to work better than everybody else's. So what do want to point out, Captain 58, tough time for Mitchell to go cold. Tom Kendall, it sucked. I watched Colton hit every 3-pointer in games, and then in the game he goes 0 for 2 from 3, and then he went 3 for 13 from the field. So that was unfortunate, but I thought, Brian, that was a huge upgrade over Quinn Danker. Again, heard he was a great guy, but man, watching him just hold on to the ball and not really distribute it was tough. So it's nice to have a point guard that was okay at distribution. Certainly looks like he's got a ceiling to go. And then I was a big fan of Jack Payne. Just sometimes bringing in guys from, we talk about it, especially a lot in football. Sometimes bringing in guys from bigger programs doesn't really mean anything. Taryn Frank, it took him a while to get on the floor here, and when he got on the floor here, he was a great kid from everything we've heard. He stuck around from the end of Kloss to Pribble, but he was never the hey, he played in the SEC. He should be feasting on the Big Sky. Didn't really happen. Jack Payne came down from Colorado State, and honestly, I thought looked really good doing it. Again, Tom Kendall said Jack Payne, my MVP, and certainly, I think in the playoff games, you could certainly say that. But Brian, that was for me, a couple new faces coming into the program and immediately looking like they belonged. And yeah, sure, I would have loved for Jack Payne to score 25 points, but if he's scoring 25 points a game, he's certainly not in the Big Sky for very long. That to me was the big thing. Seeing the player acquisition and guys coming in that certainly belong at this level, and honestly could probably be playing at schools better than Idaho at the moment. That was the for me, number one point of what went well is player recruitment is starting to drive back upwards. It feels after having a pretty desolate wasteland for 5 years.
So a couple points that I guess what went well that I agree with this. We hit the bullet points of, look, Idaho winning a Big Sky Conference tournament game. Like I got to admit that I was way more excited for that than I realized. Idaho had been a complete non-factor in the Big Sky Conference tournament for a long time. And Idaho picking up a win. No, dude, that was like the most exciting point of the year for me. And then talking myself into Idaho being competitive against Montana and dude, what if they make the conference championship, then get their ass kicked? But whatever. What if they do it? That's just kind of a fun story. And then you come crashing down to earth. But it had been so long. It's kind of like with the FCS playoffs in football. It'd been so long since Idaho had been a postseason player in any meaningful way that finally getting to taste that was, I don't know how big a deal it'll be for recruitments, but at the fan level, that was the most excited I'd been about Idaho basketball the entire year. So not insignificant to pick up that win. Also, like, hey, I want to talk Colton Mitchell in the tournament because this actually hits another point of what went well. Look, Idaho 14 wins is not that big a deal compared to last season's 11. So we're looking at it and say what may matter for next year. We had some underclassmen development of guys who have not yet left, which we'll touch on the 2 transfers we're aware of at this point. But Colton Mitchell and Jack Payne were pretty big deals developmentally for this team. Now, even against Montana and against Portland State, Colton Mitchell he couldn't shoot. He couldn't finish in the Big Sky Conference tournament. He was getting pretty damn near close to the rim on a good amount of penetration against Portland State and Montana in a way that actually he wasn't even doing for earlier in the year. Yes, I got you, Dallas. So Colton Mitchell is still a work in progress, but that work in progress we have as a redshirt freshman starting point guard, he did pretty damn well, man. Averaged nearly 12 points a game on the year. Certainly an upgrade for Idaho over last season. I certainly hope that, look, we know guys are going to leave the program. Like, that's just a fact. Something I talked about on the hashtag Only Tubs Discord. Maybe we'll get into that later. But, essentially at the end of the year, you can't be that emotionally attached to any player at this point. If Idaho only keeps 2 guys from this roster, I want it to be Colton Mitchell and Jack Payne. I want more. But if those are the only 2, if I only get 2, those are the 2 I want. Colton Mitchell made significant strides. So hoping that playing, he's from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Hopefully playing for University of Idaho kind of means a little bit more to him staying home than it might to someone else. Jack Payne's from Hawaii. So, I mean, that's another Idaho connection. But both Mitchell and Payne made different types of strides throughout the year. Mitchell, I think he had more to learn because he's a lead guard. There's a lot of responsibility there. Jack Payne's development, which was big, was at the start of the year, he looked like an energy guy. By the end of the year, he was the team's top offensive threat. Huge steps. Does he have stuff to work on? He's got to improve his ball handling. Absolutely has to, because that's how he can become a better penetrator. Dallas, feel free to laugh. That's one of the things Idaho needed. And by the end of the season, Payne was doing better at getting to the hoop. He just needs to tighten up that handle so that most of his turnovers came while he was trying to be aggressive. Good news, he was being aggressive, but he's just got to get better at that. That's an obvious next step for him on the offensive side of the ball.
Brian, very quickly, you mentioned those are the 2 guys you want to keep. You'd love to keep more, but those are the 2 big ones. James Jacobs in the comment section saying, I really hope we keep Gonzalez as well. Man, I thought Christian Gonzalez looked really good this year as well. Maybe really is a strong word, but
he took strides.
Yeah, going from the flashes we saw last year when he started 1 game, I think, but it got pretty consistent minutes and played in 30-ish games. Going from he's got a little bit of a shot, he might be able to figure it out, to he took huge strides as a shooter this year. His field goal percentage and 3-point percentage were reflective of that in huge step ups from his limited time as a freshman.
Well, yeah, he averaged 4 as a freshman, averaged like 11 and a half this year.
Yeah. But I mean, even just like the volume, the percentage went way up. I believe he shot 44% from the field instead of 36 the year before. So just nice to see, like, hey, he got rewarded with good minutes, rewarded with better playing time, or with better play in that playing time. So Brian, continue. I just wanted to give that quick shout out to Christian Gonzalez.
And hey, James, if I increase the number from 2 to 3, yes, Christian Gonzalez would join Colton Mitchell and Jack Payne. If there's only 3 guys Idaho gets to keep, those are the 3 I want to keep. There will be more. Want to say Titus Yearout deserves a little bit of attention too. He had a few bright spots. Didn't get much playing time early in the year, and it looks like it's taken both Pribble and Yearout a minute to figure out how he can contribute on a Big Sky team, because he just looks like either Pribble or Yearout or both don't exactly consider Yearout to be a point guard, but as a kind of combo guard off the bench who can score in the mid-range, so long as he's feeling comfortable and his shots falling, he certainly showed. Like I said, Yearout against Montana was one of 2 guys who looked like he was ready for that moment. So that's not nothing for a year out. Of course, hey, guys like Tyler Linhart made some strides too. Other couple other things that went well are most wins in since that 2017-2018 season. It's not nothing that they improved by 3 wins. It's just not anything to write home about or something like that. A 14-win team and 11-win team are relatively similar, but if we're looking at a trend, the trend line is up. So we have that too. And I just got to say, I can't quantify this, but I can a little bit. Dallas, do you remember back at the start of the basketball season, because football is still going on, so we weren't really covering basketball much. I watched a couple basketball games. I told you my immediate impression of Idaho basketball this year was, do you remember? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Not a single clue, Brian.
Okay, I do. I told you my immediate impression is, hey, this is a slightly better but far more fun version of last season's team, which is pretty much what I feel this team equated out to, which is, hey, the good part of that is people are slowly starting to buy in. There's moments when you watch the stream, or if you're there in person, where the energy for basketball is getting better, or you might even say is good relative to a team finishing below 500, a team that hadn't been even close to good since 2017, 2018.
I've been at a lot of games this year. It felt like they had a lot more energy this year compared to Pribble's first year and the last couple of years of Claus.
Yeah, so there is, Dallas, you're muted again.
Very quickly, Brian, just to finish off Martin's thought, he posted in the comment section while again, guys, computer issues. Sorry. Martin posted earlier when you asked what went well. Martin said, team just looked and felt much more fun to watch. Class teams felt like you knew they were going to lose, but now they feel like they have a chance in most games. Sorry, Brian, continue.
Well, yeah, and I think this team, in spite of winning 14, I think people, if you blindly watched Idaho basketball, you might have said, hey, that's a 16-17 win team. And if Idaho had gotten a 16-17 wins compared to 11, we would have said that feels kind of like a meaningful improvement from one year to another. So can we turn this into a metric that we say has value? No, but that's not the sum of everyone's experience with sports. If the team looks like they're more fun, they probably are more fun. So that obviously that went well. So Dallas, what did not go well? And I got to preface this. We have on this show tried very hard to be what I think of as fair to a new coach taking over what Idaho basketball is, with the history of what Idaho basketball has. And I just say that as we're officially 2 years in. The gloves are coming off now when we talk about what Idaho can do well, which, look, hey, we still like Pribble. We still believe in what's going on. But if a team loses 19 games, wins 14, obviously some things can go better. So, Dallas, off the top of your head, what did not go well?
Brian, this team, even though we have moved on from the disaster piece that was called Zach Kloss, even though we've moved on from this, defensively, this team looks like you could still score on them. I don't understand how it's almost just kind of the man match. Hey, we're just go play man to man all game. Don't really, you pick your guy and you just stick on him the rest of the game, and that's tough. Defensively, this team needs to make significant strides. I think offensively, you've got a pretty solid team from what they were doing. They could mostly score with just about everybody, but gotta play better defense, and I think that probably comes down to the roster, Brian. And that sucks. I hate talking about the team's just not good enough, but I just don't think the talent of the team is there. And we knew that. We knew that under Zach Kloss, as we saw all of those guys, almost all of them. I mean, he got one that went to the NBA, which is absolutely insane to me still, that Isaac Jones played here for a year. But outside of that, it was a D1 to D2 pipeline, and I feel like that is an issue. The roster here needs to be turned over a little bit more, and that's where, hey, love the guys for being Vandals, but we're going into year 3 of Pribble, and what do we need? We need some more talent. As Tom Kendall says, please give us a few decent bigs. I do think that's probably a sign, Brian. I'm sorry, I'm filibustering this whole thing here. I think it's a sign that you pointed out 2 players you wanted to keep, and then a third, and all 3 of them are guards.
So, like, the only thing I'm going to say here real quick with just the roster continuity, Pribble clearly wants to play 5 out offensively. Like, this is probably never going to be a great defensive team, which is fine. Many teams win their conference tournament and make the NCAA tournament without being great defensively. You just have to be good enough. And then, of course, if you're not very good defensively, you guys all have brains. If you're not very good defensively, you got to put some points on the board at the end. Dynamics no different in football, right? So I am not willing to call it just players issue with Idaho being as bad defensively as they were. As a quick reference, according to Basketball Reference, this year's Idaho men's team had the 338th out of 364 teams defensive rating on the season, a significant step backward from last season when Idaho was 282 out of 362, both of which, neither of those are fantastic, of course. But again, like, you don't have to be teams that score more, they tend to have a higher defensive rating. So, like, we're not trying to obsess over that, but you guys watched. Idaho was obviously a better basketball team in Pribble's first year defensively, was obviously a better defensive basketball team than what we saw this season. And I'm going to point to the Montana game and the Portland State game as well as examples of where I think, Dallas, you're right. This roster was not an army of lockdown defenders, and they probably need to recruit a couple 3-and-D type players to buttress whatever Pribble wants to do schematically. But I will say, look at Portland State, look at Montana. Phase 1, Idaho could not keep teams out of the key the entire season. How did it take the third match against Portland State to make them beat you by shooting? Like, that's a thing I think Pribble would say, hey, we probably should have figured that one out earlier.
Yeah. When I can see it and other people in the Discord can see it, and everyone's pointing out, again, that 2-3 zone you mentioned, everyone's like, whoa, this 2-3 zone, it's kind of working. Why didn't we try that earlier?
Well, like, I can tell you why they didn't try it against most teams is because it's suicide against most teams in modern basketball. Portland State uniquely can't shoot. So that's why they use it against Portland State. Now, the other thing I'm going to say is look at the Montana game. And there was look, basketball is no different than football, guys. Like, players do blow defensive assignments. The players do need to show up and perform. So sometimes it's hard to disaggregate what's coaching versus what's players. What I'd say is when you see repeated mistakes over and over and over, it is one of 2 things on the coaching end. Either poor scheme or something about your messaging is not working. Get the guy out who keeps making the mistake, or figure out how to get the message across better. And against Montana, Idaho did go zone a decent amount and looked terrible. And when I say terrible, I mean just absolutely no discipline on pointing out shooters, on staying home on shooters when there's some penetration. Idaho helped from one pass away in zone off of Montana's best shooter multiple times, which in basic terms, just based off where the penetration was coming from, that should not be where help is. The scheme of a defense cannot be, we're going to leave the best shooter on the opposing team wide open from 3. If you guys ever played basketball, you know that good shooters, wide open 3, that's pretty much a 70% shot. And Idaho gave up essentially 70% wide open 3 shots to the best shooter on Montana time and again. That was not simply Montana like breaking down and forcing help from where it had to come. And that, like, just the logical conclusion was wide open shot for the best guy. Idaho made mistakes. So I just think the defensive discipline against Montana was more emblematic of what we saw the entire year. So it's a combination of, hey, some players got to show up and do better. But at the same time, you see the same thing happening over and over and over again. At some point, the coach has some accountability for that. And like, hey, 338th out of 364 teams in the nation defensively, not going to cut it. It's actually kind of shocking Idaho still finished as the number 6 seed in spite of that defensive effort. So, like, hey, maybe you throw that in the what went well is just absolutely atrocious defense all year, and still Idaho was close to treading water. There's clearly some things going on well for that to happen, but what did not go well are the type of things that stopped Idaho from taking a developmental step, the things that if they're not fixed could stop Idaho from taking a developmental step in the future. Man, defensively, Idaho, I will say this, I will not change this take from our Big Sky Conference tournament preseason episode beforehand. I think every team in the Big Sky wanted to play Idaho in the first round. And I think it's because of the defense. Now, that bit Portland State in the ass because Idaho changed things up and it worked. I don't know. I think Idaho actually may have kind of needed Portland State for that defensive strategy to work, but whatever, they got the W. Other thing that I'd say did not go well. I mean, Idaho, the good news, Idaho had some guys took developmental steps, like we said earlier, but Idaho still is a few players away. There are certainly a few players away defensively. Now, maybe internal development of guys like Jack Payne and Colton Mitchell could create the like shot creators I've been talking about in the hashtag OnlyTubs Discord that I think Idaho needs. But we saw the gap between Idaho and Montana in the tournament. It's pretty damn far. So Montana's not the barometer for Idaho. Idaho still hasn't had a winning season for 7 years. So we'll worry about winning the conference when we're done worrying about, are we more likely to win a given game or not? So that's a couple steps away. But the Big Sky is not a fantastic basketball conference. They're one bid league, haven't won a conference NCAA tournament game since like 06, 07 or something like that. I can look it up. It's that don't quote that number, but it's around that year, like around 06. It was Montana with Kareem Jamar, Will Cherry, back in the Damian Lillard days in the Big Sky. That's how long it's been. If Idaho is going to get to the point that we're even pretending the Vandals are going to compete for an NCAA tournament bid, there's a talent gap between the Northern Colorados and the Montanas of the conference and everyone else. Idaho happens to be in that everyone else category. Mm-hmm. So if the Vandals are going to take a step next season, Pribble defensively has got to completely go back to the drawing board. Players got to execute, but with how repeated the mistakes were, how repeatedly soft this Idaho team was defensively, especially after we saw Idaho look better with very much the same roster last season. I know my man James is going to say, hey, Trey Blossomgame wasn't on the team. He wasn't going to make a meaningful difference. He averaged 4 points a game last season. He wasn't about to play 40 minutes a game this season. Maybe like if he's healthy next year and he contributes, that's part of Idaho turning it around. But it's not one guy that would have changed things much this season. So Pribble's got to go back to the drawing board defensively. He's got to hopefully retain a good core of the roster, but he also needs some roster spots to open because if Idaho's going to take another step, it's because new guys join this team while a couple of guys take developmental steps. There's no way around it unless, if Idaho returned to essentially the same roster next season, I'd expect they'd be around 500-ish, which, hey, that's cool, moving in the right direction. But, when Pribble was in year 3 as D2 stop, that's when his team made their first big jump. Mm-hmm. So still, hey, we still know the trend line is up. There's still a lot to like about what Alex Pribble has done to Idaho basketball. So, in general, still happy with where we're at. But we've got 2 years of evidence now. We can talk about what's there and what's not. And the big issue for this team this year was they could not defend. And that's got to change if Idaho's going to take a step. And they don't have to be great. They just can't be like worst in the nation.
That's the thing, Brian. And that's where I was, I kind of mentioned that at the beginning of my ramble of like, hey, coaching, you got to change some things up. But there's also different scheme, different personnel. Like again, finishing in the bottom 15, 20 of defensive ratings across the entire 360 plus teams in Division I basketball. Not great. It's pretty easy to circle that as that gets even outside of just absolutely atrocious to just bad. And this is a team that wins more games than they lose. That defense becomes anything close to below average. And maybe we're talking about this team winning 20 games and yeah, Pribble's got Idaho basketball on the right trajectory, but it's a pretty big, those are pretty big steps to have to take here. But it's pretty easy to circle. Hey, what didn't go well? Well, defensively, this team couldn't stop a nosebleed most of the time, other than, again, a couple halves or even a game here and there. But Brian, I do want to. We're at 50 minutes in. I do want to acknowledge you mentioned it. Those roster spots.
Actually, hey, before I do want to make one reference. We did it with women. We did not do it with men. Idaho finished tied for sixth with NAU at the end of the conference season. Their preseason picking was a little bit split. The coaches picked Idaho to finish seventh, so essentially dead on. The media picked Idaho to finish ninth, so a little bit better than preseason projections, in totality.
Thank you for that, Brian. So you mentioned it, roster spots. Already 2 Vandals in the portal. Julius Mims and Tyler Maris are both or Maris. Again, I'm terrible with pronunciations. Thank you. Both of those guys in the portal, both the starting forwards for the Vandals this year. Mims technically listed as a senior, did senior day stuff with the Vandals, but again with precedent that's gone on as the NCAA seems to change weekly because of laws and regulations and things like that all being figured out for the very first time since they chose hey, let's just not do anything about paying players until we're forced to, and now here we are with it being the Wild West. Anyways, off my soapbox, both of those guys moving on. Julius Mims, because he had those years at NIC, I believe he's going to have multiple years of eligibility to move on. Tyler Russ, I mean, hey, if he thinks he's going to get paid somewhere, hey, you know what? More power to you, man. If you're going to take off and try to get a bag, or I don't know, not the playing time was probably the problem here, but whatever the reason is, hey, best of luck to those guys. But again, Brian, there's already 2 roster spots that have opened up as either a spot for maybe a guy like Tyler Linhart to keep developing and get a starting spot in his senior year, or maybe that's, hey, we do need to see some recruitment of some starting forwards over the guys that are existing here. Any spot or direction you would want to go with those roster spots, Brian?
So, I mean, the first question, of course, is how many spots there actually are. The roster itself lists pretty much 2 seniors, Kyson Rose and Julius Mims. Like I said, Mims is in the portal. You might also call Jack Hatton redshirt junior. I don't know if he's going to be back next season. For those who count, a redshirt junior is 4 years, and Hatton did walk on senior day. So there's 3 theoretical spots plus some rest leaving that's 4 spots. The first thing I want is there probably needs to be 2 or 3 more. And I would look to guys who've been here for 1 season. For example, not trying to call any guys out, like JoJo Anderson. The team got better when he played less at the end of the year. So that's an example of a guy who I would not be shocked if he chose to go back to a level where he can play a lot, because he was very good when he was at Whitworth. Mm-hmm. But it's a jump to go from a place like Whitworth to Idaho.
I think he was the MVP of the conference his last year, Whitworth. So yeah, very big jump to go from D3 to D1. The Tyler Harvey story of a guy going from Whitworth to Eastern to leading the nation in shooting and scoring and ending up getting drafted. Yeah, he never really made it to the NBA, but he made it to the NBA draft and got picked. Yeah. That's a pretty rare story to see. It's cool that JoJo was able to go from D3 to D1, but like you said, it didn't end up working out as well as maybe both parties probably would have wanted.
Or like, hey, Jaden Stevens is another guy who he transferred to Idaho from Oregon State. He went to Gonzaga Prep in Spokane. I don't know the story exactly on Stevens, because he's an intriguing Big Sky matchup at 6'7", and he plays out on the wing, but he never really saw the floor. He wasn't really part of this team as far as contributing. So I would not be shocked to see JoJo and Jaden both declare for the portal. The asterisk here is
61 minutes for Jaden on the air.
Pribble has seemed, and look, I don't have inside info here. This is just watching, and this is actually a compliment I'm going to give to Pribble. He clearly wants to build as old school as he can. He wants to build a culture. He wants to keep guys here. He looks like he wants players to understand he's a man of his word, stuff like that. but like, I don't know. If that's the case, find a middle ground. Idaho needs more roster spots. So hey, maybe that happens and guys just leave, like Tyler Mruss. And this is just I'm gonna bring this up for like 1 second. I talked about it in the Discord. This isn't to like rain on the parade or anything. Just with rhythmically how we know when a season ends, Idaho is going to lose guys, especially on the men's side, to the transfer portal. I think what I've landed on is just the second a guy declares for the portal, all the charity that we usually have in talking about the guy as a contributor is out the window. So I'll give you an example, Russ. If Russ sticks around, hey, he's a role player who can hit open threes. There's a place for those guys on every basketball team. The moment he hits the transfer portal, yeah, he was an up and down catch and shoot three shooter who couldn't guard anyone, couldn't dribble. I'm okay with that roster spot. That's just kind of how I understand guys when they leave. So,
and Brian, we talked about it before. We have no insider or idea about this, but we've talked about it before. Sometimes guys go into the portal because they know they're going to either be recruited over or they're told, "Hey, get the fuck out of here." So, who knows what's going on there? So, just to also keep that perspective in is like, hey, sometimes the guys leave because they're told to get out.
Yeah. So what Idaho needs, because you're asking what I want them to get. Well, look, Idaho does need some size. Because right now, Lindhart is the top returning post. And if Idaho's going to take a step forward defensively, Tyler Lindhart cannot be your best post defender. Like, just absolutely cannot be the case. So Idaho needs some size. Now, because it's Big Sky, what they need is either one of two things with that size. They just need guys who can kind of eat up rebounds and play solid defense, kind of like Trajan Sawyer at Montana, where they're also physically thicker. And the reason I say that is so they can set good screens. Or you need guys who are just the team itself gets a little taller. Maybe that's wings or guys who are like hybrid posts, but the guys can shoot. Because Pribble wants to play 5 out. That's what he wants to do, which means your center either needs to be able to shoot threes or he's got to be a threat running to the rim off of pick and rolls. Otherwise, that clogs up the middle. So, I mean, that's, I think, what Pribble's going to be looking for is posts who can shoot threes or posts who are kind of like Mims where they can be a threat off a pick and roll. Yep. On the offensive side of the ball, I mean, I want Idaho to get more scores. I mean, yes, we need guys to play defense. I talked about getting 3-and-D guys as something that could help Idaho too, assuming Jack Payne and Colton Mitchell both stay. But big picture for Idaho is they need guys who can break teams down off the dribble better. Idaho's issue this season was not on the offensive side of the ball overwhelmingly. But if you watched, there were times when Idaho was a little bit too passive in looking for a three before trying to get the ball inside the three-point line at all. I think just having some better ball handlers solves that issue to about 80%. And then we're not really bitching about it. And penetration, Dallas, either gets you good looks inside or get you wide open looks outside. So that's what I want. I want a couple guys. I think the bigs we're going to look for. We need to have strong guys who can shoot and that's what I'm talking about with a guy like Trajan Sawyer to shoot wide open threes or guys who can roll. You want at least 1 or 2 3-and-D guys just to have better defense overall. But Idaho also needs guys who are creative off the dribble. We get some combination of those guys who are ready to start at the Big Sky level. That's how this team looks like they can compete for a top 3 seed.
Brian, we're rounding into an hour. So obviously we're talking about top 3 seed. What going into year 3 of Alex Pribble? What is, gun to your head right now, 7 months before the season really even starts up? What do you call a successful year 3 under Alex Pribble?
Have to be over 500, not just in Big Sky play on the year. Have to be over 500, and have to feel like they're not. I think it'd be unfair to say that Idaho is going to, win the conference next year. There's some good teams in the Big Sky for basketball. Why not 51 saying Rasmussen is a strong 6'7" kid that can shoot. He will help. We will obviously have to look up that one real quick. If Idaho can head into the Big Sky Conference tournament and we're not thinking like, hey, maybe they can win a game. we're thinking, look, obviously they're going to win their first game. They're going to get a first round bye. That puts them in the semis. Now we're suddenly looking at a matchup to get to the conference final. That's what Idaho needs to be, which was essentially how Montana State finished this year. And I mean, Montana State had a lot of, I know that Logie's been there for a while. I know he's had some success, but Montana State had a lot of retooling to do last year. I don't expect Idaho is going to need to be quite at that level, but that's the first thing. And I'm going to jump back to McLean Westbrook from earlier in the show, Tom Kendall on there too. Idaho's got to beat Idaho State, man. But we do need King Spud. There is clearly, if you watch the games this season, the most energized game in Big Sky play that was not the tournament was Idaho State both times for Idaho. So whatever you want to say about rivals in other sports, and I've talked about this on the show, I don't really have a ton of patience for like that they're not our rivals talk, because if you don't want to have fun, like, okay, go ahead, don't have fun. I care about the Idaho State game more than a lot of games. That, to me, that's some version of a rival. I'm now done talking about that. The players clearly buy into this as some sort of rival. So I think beating Idaho State has to be part of the metric, but the totality is what I care about.
And Brian, very last cleanup here. Why not 51 making a case for Austin Rasmussen, the strong 6'7" kid who can shoot? Just so you are aware, Brian, Jackson Rasmussen is currently playing at Utah Prep, but played at Owyhee in Meridian freshman through junior season and was considered the number one prospect in the state of Idaho. So he signed with Idaho in November of last year, with Pribble saying, keeping the best talent in Idaho in a Vandal uniform is important to us. Idaho fans should be really excited about Jackson joining the Vandal family. So Ron asking if Chris Rasmussen, the former National Gatorade Player of the Year, is his father. I do not believe so, Ron, but we will do our best to find that out. Gentlemen, we are over an hour on closing the book of Starch Madness / Sadness. Any final thoughts on men or women basketball in the state / University of Idaho, the 2024-2025 season?
Well, I have a non-basketball thing just to hit on our next episodes. Obviously, we're closing in on spring football. That's something we're going to talk about. But Dallas, this is something you and I had both talked about, as well as the show. The orientation show typically is to talk about like actual events that happened, not be like a traditional podcast where it's like topics are what we talk about. We're probably going to have a few more podcast-y type of episodes between now and our break in the summer, because there's a few things that I think, I think people will be interested. There's kind of some batch football news for us to talk about, both Idaho specific and FCS NCAA specific, which I think listeners will care about hearing an Idaho perspective on it. But second, there's some other things that we have just chosen to not talk about. For example, like we haven't done our full adjudication of our experience in the Jason Eck era. Eck leaves, so then we have news to talk about. So like that, obviously that changed things. I still think it's a topic worth getting to well after football season, which is when we'd get to it. But that's just going to be a little bit, and that might feel like a program change for some, if you're a regular listener, as we run into our break. And we'll, of course, we have our questions up. We typically have a questions episode to close before our break in the summer, just for fun anyway. But we've still got the meat of spring football to take care of. And then, a couple podcasty episodes, and that'll pretty much take us into our break before we hit the ground running in the fall.
Brian, I think you hit that all pretty well. We didn't quite cover like all the coaches that got hired in the part of the new Thomas Ford staff, and there obviously spring football is going to start up here in the near future, and we'll bring you guys as much as we can from that. It's obviously pretty hard to report on, and especially in the NIL and transfer portal era. If you guys are following FBS football and some of the bigger programs there are coaches. I will call out Nebraska and Matt Rule as an example. They canceled their spring game and have announced that they're not going to do it anymore, just because it's too much of a meat market of here's all of our players, come check them out. And there we go. I got the reaction I was looking for there. If you're not watching on the YouTube, Brian just opened his mouth and just, wow, he was ready for that meat. But I think we're gonna keep seeing this happen. I think Idaho probably does not have a spring game 10 years from now, maybe even 5 years from now. I think that the way college football is changing, I think spring football is going to change. The practices are what's important. The game itself is a complete crapshoot and really just for the fans to have fun anyways. Not a ton you're going to learn out of it. But now I think programs are going to start weighing the cost of, do we want to give, again, let's say Jack Lane behind Giovanni McCoy. Do we want to give anybody film on Idaho's backup quarterback that, hey, he's actually pretty good? Not really. So we'll see what happens with spring football. We don't have any sort of inside information about what's going to go on, but just be aware outside of the Idaho ecosystem, there are definitely coaches that are starting to shut down spring football games. So we will bring you everything we can from spring football when it starts, and we'll do our best to cover spring football as long as it goes. But with that said, Brian and Martin, we will be back shortly to talk everything and anything regarding Vandal sports across the spring as we inch ever closer to that dead zone between now and the start of football. But with that said, gentlemen, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Vandals. And I forgot to put it up already. Let's go.